The EU has shown its true colours. And it's quite interesting to see how many people who were quite strong supporters of the European Union in the political class, in the establishment, in the media, even they are turning on the European Union. Because the European Union, let's not beat about the bush on this, the European Union is putting the lives of people in Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and England under threat. If it carries out its threat to stop the AstraZeneca vaccine being exported from, I think it's Holland, to the United Kingdom, there's absolutely no doubt that a number of people will catch COVID as a result of not being inoculated, not being vaccinated, and could well die. So the European Union is, in effect, carrying out biological warfare against the people of the United Kingdom. Now, Boris Johnson keeps calling the European Union his friends and his allies. That's not how friends behave. That's how vicious, totalitarian, communist dictators behave. And of course, many people in the European Union are closet communists. They are totalitarian, and they have designs on a European empire that would rival Rome or even the British Empire. The reality is that Brexit was 100% the right thing to do. But not just for England, for the whole of the United Kingdom. For Scotland, and of course we see the bigoted, hate-filled Scottish National Socialist Party and its splinter group, its dissident nationalist group, Alba, doing all they can, straining every sinew to wrest the people of Scotland away from their kith and kin in the rest of the United Kingdom. And I'm talking about people in the north of England, people in the northeast and the northwest of England, people in Northumberland, people in Cumbria, who have a lot more in common with their friends and neighbours in the Scottish borders than they do with people in London. I'm talking about the Ulster Scots people who live in Northern Ireland, who have a lot more in common with their friends and neighbours on the west coast of Scotland, who many times travel across the Irish Sea to the 12th of July celebrations. So the SNP want to take the Scottish people not just away from the United Kingdom, but into slavery. The SNP and Alba are not going to liberate the Scottish people. They're going to carry them away into slavery, and they're going to trade off old hatreds and old bigotries that should have been put away. I've said this many times, I'll say it again. The only acceptable bigotry in the United Kingdom today is a hatred of the British. And in Scotland, that hatred manifests itself in a hatred of the English and of English people in general. Now, thankfully, not every Scotsman hates the English. Far from it. And I would say not even every SNP voter hates the English. But at the core of what the SNP believe is a visceral hatred of the English. And they have buried that to a large extent, and they will use words like London or Westminster. But what they mean when they're talking about London or Westminster is Englishmen. We don't want to be ruled by Englishmen. That's the cry of the Scottish nationalist. But they're quite happy to be ruled by a totalitarian, undemocratic statelet, or superstate, I should say, that's been created in Brussels. They'd rather be governed by a Latvian deputy prime minister or a failed German defence minister than they would by the British government in Westminster. Of course, to a great extent, Scotland has got the best of both worlds. They've been given huge amounts of liberty and power to govern themselves. They basically are an independent nation within the United Kingdom. And I tell you something, the laws that they're passing, I wouldn't want to live in Scotland. I'm even dubious about visiting Scotland. Their so-called hate speech laws are a license to lock people up for nothing, for having a different opinion to the Scots nationalist, progressive, wokerati class that rules Scotland. But they're quite happy. Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond are quite happy to be governed by a European Union that is willing to put Scottish lives at risk by blocking vaccines coming from the Netherlands to the United Kingdom. And then, of course, we look across the Irish Sea and we see the green-eyed monster of Irish republicanism and the green-eyed monster of the European Union. The European Union, at the complicity with the agreement of Boris Johnson, has annexed Northern Ireland. And that's why the monstrous and despicable Northern Ireland Protocol has to go. The vast majority of people in Northern Ireland have been negatively affected by the so-called Northern Irish Protocol. All sorts of products and produce are now not available that were available before Brexit. And that's not the fault of Brexit. That is the fault of the deal that Boris struck with Leo Varadkar and the EU Commission. And Boris has a lot to answer for, because Boris has betrayed the people of Northern Ireland. And I don't believe the people of Northern Ireland, no matter what background they're from, I don't believe the people of Northern Ireland are going to roll over and allow themselves to be taken over by a hostile foreign power and to have the influence of extremists like Sinn Féin ever increasing in every sphere and every area of their lives. So there will be a day of reckoning. There will be a time when the people of Northern Ireland stand up and say, here we stand, we can do no other, and stand for what they believe in and stand for the national pride and their right to remain British. But as well as that, the Unionists in Scotland, it's time for them to stand up and be counted. It's time for them to come together. And if the parties in Scotland, the pro-union parties, cannot form an electoral pact, they will doom Scotland to becoming a failed state, to becoming a progressive, woke, totalitarian hellhole, governed by a corrupt and perverse administration. An administration with people in it who are duplicitous and dishonest. That's what Scotland has got to look forward to. And as for England, well, the so-called Conservative Party is not doing very much to conserve at the minute. The so-called Conservative Party is passing legislation restricting people's right to protest. The so-called Conservative Party is bending over backwards to every minority group that shouts loud enough and stamps their feet enough to get noticed. Look at what's happened in Batley. We look at what's happened in Bristol. We look at what happened at Downing Street just over a year ago. Police officers getting down on one knee. We look at the national football team and the national rugby team getting down on one knee. And that bowing on one knee is not about racial equality. It's about submitting a nation to a Marxist communist ideology, which is what you get in BLM. And when we see what's happened in Batley with the extremists there, religious extremists, persecuting a young father, he's now had to leave his home. He's been suspended from his job. He's on the verge of a nervous breakdown. His mother is terrified for her life. He's got a young family. He's got children. He's had to leave his home. Why? Because he had the absolute audacity to show pictures of some camel herder from the 7th century who's created more havoc in the world than Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin put together. So I believe it's time for patriotic people in the UK, people who love the country. We're not talking about lunatic, extremist, racists. We're talking about genuine, real people who love their country, who want the best for their children. I believe it's time for us all to come together in a pan-unionist front, in a political and social way, using social media, using street protest, peaceful street protest, using newspaper columns, writing to MPs, using social media, using video, using every single tool available to us, writing to your local media. We need to come together, a pan-unionist front, a group of people who are not so insular they only look at Northern Ireland, are not so insular they only look at Scotland, are not so insular they only look at England, but a pan-United Kingdom front that stands together for freedom, for justice, for peace, and for democracy. I believe that's what's needed to save the United Kingdom. And who will do it? Who will step up to the mark? Who will put their head above the parapet and take part in this great project? We've got Brexit, but now we need to get a full United Kingdom out of the European Union. We need to protect the United Kingdom from nationalism, whether it's Scottish, Irish, or English. And we need to stand together against extremism of all forms, whether it's the religious extremism of the jihadists, whether it's the far right extremism, which I believe is a tiny, tiny minority, or whether it's the far more dangerous and probably the biggest threat that the United Kingdom faces, the far left and progressive woke globalist agenda that will still be plotting to destroy the United Kingdom and drag us back into these supranational organisations. It's time to stand up for the country. It's time to fight, not physically, but to fight with the pen, with the video camera, with the social media post, with the newspaper article, with the street protest, even just talking to your neighbours. It's time to stand up for all corners of the United Kingdom and let the people that will try and destroy us know that we will never surrender. See you all soon.